Hello and welcome you crazy people, my name is Jay and in this video I'm going to be asking the question whether or not Kickstarter for MMOs has pretty much been a mistake. Now I'm going to assume and presume that most of you know what I mean when I say Kickstarter. It's any kind of crowd-funded thing. In this case we're obviously looking at MMOs. Now there have actually been quite a few of these big crowd-funded MMOs that haven't quite actually materialized, and that's fine because obviously these things take a while and maybe we're just not at the point where they're not actually ready to be released, which is okay. And before all of this we have the traditional way of doing MMOs, which is basically a big developer with a big publisher, generally with the rights to a big IP. Now we can look at World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, etc. We had Final Fantasy as well. I would also put on maybe like Guild Wars 2 into that category, even though technically that doesn't have like a large IP, but you know, big funding behind it with a big studio. But then with Kickstarter we have games like Crowfall, Star Citizen, Ashes of Creation, Camelot Unchained, Chronicles of Elyria, and you know, probably many more. And generally these MMOs have been made by ex-developers of previously big MMOs. And the way that they do this, it's essentially they take the creative minds that they know, but they don't want to be tied down to like pre-existing financial arrangements, so that they'll go on Kickstarter and they say, hey look, we've got the creative team behind X and Y and we're going to creatively create this kind of game. If you want it, then come ahead and back us on Kickstarter. And we won't be tied to this traditional funding system, maybe from like a giant publisher who's going to be like, oh no, you have to make your game mass market appeal, so please fund us and we'll do our game the way that we want it to be, and that's the way that you want it to be as well. And the question really is, has it worked? And I think really that sort of depends on your point of view. If we ask the question if any of these games have actually made it to like mass appeal, any MMO that was Kickstarter, as we had a mass appeal game, I think the answer to that is no. In fact, one of the only games I can think of that is actually fully released that did a bit of crowdfunding was Albion Online. So if we're going to look at like big success with a big mass market appeal, big audience and stuff like that, have we had a game from Kickstarter MMOs that have met that criterion? I think the answer to that is no. But I'm not sure that's necessarily how we should define success for these Kickstarter MMOs, because quite frankly the idea is that they are making niche games that otherwise may not have been made using the traditional big developer, big publisher, big IP kind of system. You know, we're taking a niche game and like a unique idea and we're going to push that. And to that extent we have seen a bit of success. I think we said we had Albion Online, Crowfall is in beta and seems to be hitting that kind of niche audience as well. Temtem was basically a Pokemon MMO clone. That's maybe a bit like upsetting to hear if you're a big fan of that, but that's basically what it is. So we have had some success with these niche kind of games making it out to the public at least. But that's not to say there's not been at least some questionable activity regarding like Kickstarter MMOs, and I'm only going to give you like two brief examples that have sort of like recently happened. Whether or not I know all the details, I obviously don't know all the details. The first one I want to talk about is Camelot Unchained. Now basically they have recently made what appears to be like a co-op horde mode wave game that is essentially a standalone game. It's called Final Stand Ragnarok, I believe, and it's first access. Now, I won't go into the details of this, but a lot of people think, hey, you've made that because you want money for Camelot Unchained, but you're not actually admitting that. Now, obviously, you know, officially it's not the case, and officially they don't need the game, they don't need this Ragnarok to do well to make money for Camelot Unchained, but that's what some people are saying. I feel like a reporter where they say, how do you feel when some people are saying that you're an idiot? Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, whether or not it's true is hard to really determine, but people believe that essentially they made this game just to get more money for Camelot Unchained, or any other reason that you would need more money. But that one's like perhaps relatively mild. Then we move on to like Chronicles of Elyria, which was a massive Kickstarter. I think it had like maybe like $8 million or something like that. You know, cool concept, all that kind of stuff. And then in early 2020, I think either March or May, the studio's like, oh no, coronavirus, we're shuttering, we're not opening. The game's pretty much done so. Except then they claim, oh actually the game's not done so. And then people are like, well, you're only saying it's not done so because some people in the community were going to sue you. So like whatever you think, I mean, a lot of people think that this game is essentially now like vaporware, a scam, and it actually isn't going to materialize. So depending, I mean, you might end up with something, because apparently they are now back working on it to some extent, but a smaller scale version of the game. But you know, the game's unlikely to materialize. All those dollars, millions of dollars that people have put into it may not appear. And beyond just like this questionable nature of some Kickstarter MMOs, like the games that we just mentioned, having like the moments, some of them may be legit, some of them may not be, but the actual outcomes of the games that we've had aren't necessarily filling me with like pure optimism. Crowfall, which is a game that I backed, is in beta, and you know, quite frankly, it's not the game for me, but I don't actually think that's a problem anymore, because I do think that that game is catering to its audience well enough. Now, I personally think that Crowfall, by the way, for those of you who don't know, Crowfall is mainly like a PvP guild versus guild sieges and stuff like that. It's in beta. It's probably going to hit that audience like well enough. It's a niche enough game that I think they might be happy with it. Whether or not there's, I don't think it'll find mass appeal, but I could easily be wrong. I'll Be Online seems to cater to that kind of like PvP crowd. That's fine. But then you get games like Star Citizen, which, I mean, I don't even know what's going on with Star Citizen. I've never even properly looked at it, but it's just accrued like so much crowdfunding, like in the tens of millions. I'm not even sure what it's up to. I have a feeling it's like 30 million, but it's a lot of dollars, and the game progresses, it appears to be quite slowly. And you know, I'm not necessarily calling it a scam or anything like that, but it's in the community, it's a bit of a meme, isn't it? Because it's had so much money and it's taking so long to actually finally deliver whatever kind of game it's going to be. And then we've got stuff like Ashes of Creation. Ashes of Creation, the community is very optimistic for it, but it's basically in alpha or pre-alpha, developmental alpha, so it's years away from release. We're not going to see it anytime soon. That obviously had a big Kickstarter as well. We've got Pantheon Online, which is in pre-alpha. There's Camelot Unchained, which is actually, I think it's in beta 1, but I've personally not been following some of these games. Basically, I think at best, the jury is out. There are some niche games getting made, and beyond even those niche games that I talked about here, like Crowfall, there are like smaller MMOs that maybe are getting funding where they would never have got funding. These are the kind of ones where they're asking for like $10,000, $20,000, maybe $100,000. Because quite frankly, to make a mass appeal MMO, you obviously need way more than that. So I'm happy that they exist. They're just not something that I'm personally like that interested in. But I don't think we can reasonably at this point look at any of the Kickstarter MMOs and say that has been a true success. Now, I think Albion Online is possibly closest to that because, you know, regardless of what you think of the game, it delivered essentially on what they were saying they would deliver on. And I think in that sense it's been good. I think Crowfall might be another success story. And as I said, here I'm deeming success, not trying to have a game that's trying to be a WoW killer, because a lot of these games aren't trying to be that like WoW killer game, which is where a lot of people think that the previous like big IP, big publisher games were failing, is that they were trying to kill WoW instead of making something that was interesting. Whereas these games are trying to make something interesting and not trying to kill WoW. But it's whether or not they're even like successfully delivering on that. And I still, as I said before, I think the jury is out. We haven't necessarily seen the fruits of the labour enough to really determine if Kickstarter has been a bit of a mistake. Personally, there's been so much money like thrown at these companies and stuff like that with so little like actual deliverables that if there was another game coming along now, I'd possibly tell people to just don't get caught in the hype, keep your money in your own pocket before you make a proper decision about funding a game. However, that being said, apparently Ashes of Creation is going to be opening up their Alpha 1 backing options. And because I've made an MMO Buddy gaming channel, I'm sort of tempted to throw my money at it, but I'm going to know that the reality is that the game might not be what they are saying they want it to be. Not out of maliciousness, not out of like evilness, although some of the MMO games may have been that. I'm not saying Chronicles of Bolivia was that, but you know, scam games and vaporware games aren't uncommon. I don't feel like Ashes of Creation fits into that category, but you know, always be aware of that kind of stuff, especially on Kickstarter. I think Kickstarter, you only put your money there if you would be willing enough to lose it. And that's not saying you're willfully throwing money away, but you have to be enough to be like, well, if it goes, I'm not going to be too unhappy about it. And we're not going to get the WoW killer from them, I don't think, unless Ashes of Creation is somehow miraculously incredible. But I don't think that's necessarily the point of these Kickstarter MMOs. I just would like to see a few more actual games get actually released from these Kickstarters. It's nice to see Temtem and Crowfall be a thing, but I want them to get to release. I want Pantheon to get to release, Camelot Unchained to get to release. There's a lot of games that I'm not really paying attention to because they're so like early in development relatively. So I want them to get made and to fit these niche audience, and you know, I want to play them myself. Until then, this like traditional funding style of MMOs, you know, with the big publishers, with the big developers, with the big IPs, are still dominating like the audiences really. If you look on Twitch or whatever on YouTube, you know, the top 4 MMOs, World of Warcraft, Guild Wars 2, Final Fantasy 14, Elder Scrolls Online, pretty much. That's it really. Albion Online's getting there. It's not really in the same category, in the same league, but at least it's a thing. So unless we have a big budget game coming out, then I can't really see the paradigm really shifting. We've got New World, which is interesting because it's Amazon like getting into the genre, and they're obviously planning on making a new Lord of the Rings game. So are they just testing the waters? It sort of feels like that might be the case. I'm hoping for more stuff like that from other companies that sort of feel like they want to, you know, reinvigorate the genre. Anyway, have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.